Assalamu alaikum and welcome everyone to Peace Beyond Borders. About this podcast grew out of the Davis Projects for Peace with the belief that ordinary people, especially young people, can do extraordinary things when they are given the tools and the room to lead. And we are opening a new chapter with this season, one focused on the intersection of youth, climate, peace, and security. Why? Because increasingly the places where conflict live and the places where climate breaks down are the same places, and too often the people bearing the cost are the ones with the least say in the response. And I'm more than honored today. Why? Because today's guest speaker has spent the better part of 3 decades thinking, writing, and working at exactly this intersection. He's a PhD scholar in peace and conflict studies, a former UN military observer deployed in Sierra Leone, Syria, a published author and a practitioner who has trained peacekeepers and policymakers alike. He's also my professor, Dr. Khalid Mahmood Shafi. Welcome to Peace Beyond Borders, sir. It is truly an honor for me today to host you as a guest speaker for this session.
Thank you for having me.
Pleasure. So, sir, my first question would be that you have argued that geopolitics and geoeconomics must now be joined by a third lens, which is geo-environment. So what really broke that idea, open for you? What was that moment in the field? Is it a piece of evidence or something else?
I'd say that it was basically spending time in the field and realizing that the damage and destruction and the deaths because of the environment, climate are much more than the conventional threats which are there, like conflict, terrorism, insurgency. And moreover, the time lag for environmental damage is very prolonged and the geographical area is very extended. So this was basically the time spent in the field and seeing the actual destruction and death because of hardcore terrorism and because of climate change. That was the driver. And if I were to, yeah, please.
Yeah, sure. Please carry on.
And if I were to explain, I take it from two loops. So one is the security loop and second is the environmental loop. If you see from the security loop, it was, I think, about 190 years ago that Clausewitz said that the Clausewitz Trinity rests straight in the center and has three pillars: the government, people, and the military. And over the years, economics was added and the triangle became a square. And then we had another element of media and it became a pentagon. And of course, the media, along with the three component of the print, electronic, and the social media which is there. But in the future, I believe that this pentagon is going to change into a hexagon. And the sixth element would be the environment, along with its three elements of land, air, and water. And very interestingly, if we take it from the other side also, you see the climate change was basically a technical issue, an atmospheric issue. It was one domain. And then second, the economics was added to it. And about, I think, 8 years back, William Nordhaus won a Nobel Peace Prize of linking climate change and economics in his integrated assessment model. So it became the second dimension. The third was the social and geopolitics. And now increasingly security and climate peace security is being talked. And this is the big elephant in the room. So I'm glad that today you have selected this topic and of course incorporated the youth element in that.
Yes, sir, indeed. I think, yes, sir.
And I would just like to say that you said of geo-environment, I would say that security, whether it is traditional security, state-centric, or non-traditional security, people-centric, is no longer about territory. It is about the stability of the ecosystem.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, sir, when it comes to youth as well, and if we take that into account, so more than 0.5% of the global population is youth. So I really want that perspective in the conversation as well. So really glad that you also talked about the youth perspective in your response to that question as well. So you also cite a striking empirical finding that for every 1 degree rise in global temperature, intergroup conflict rises by nearly 14%. And for many listeners, climate is still like an environmental story, a coral reef, a melting glacier. So while making that statistic, how do you feel real to someone who has never lived in a climate fragile setting? So yeah, how that statistic work there, actually, that you have made that?
That's a very interesting question. And this empirical evidence has established that for every 1 degrees rise, there is an increase of 4% interpersonal conflicts and 14% intergroup conflicts. And once you relate it to somebody who has never been exposed to it, let me tell you that I think, although, of course, the elite, they live in controlled settings, controlled environment, they're not affected by 1 degree centigrade, but it's not possible. Let me give you, I think, just a few weeks before it was found that Iceland is a country which used to be mosquito free, but now there are, first time, I think, last year in 2025, first time few species of mosquitoes were found over there because of the global warming. You see, so those people who had never seen mosquitoes, they would are going to be affected by it. And on the contrary, the melting of the ice over there, the polar bear losing all its territory. So I would say that since everybody is exposed to the outer environment, so they would be affected, whether in the form of floods, whether in, you see, in the Arctic, the melting of the ice, in the third pole over here, melting of the glaciers. It is not possible to live in your own islands of prosperity. So climate, the environment affects all. And earlier we realize, the better it is.
Yes, indeed. I think also, if we talk about Pakistan, so the 2022 floods and the Siachen, even the Indus Basin, are other climate disasters that we are witnessing now every year with more intensity. So that actually underlines the importance that climate is having on public lives as well. So yeah, I think this is something which needs to be seriously taken around as well.
Yes, just briefly, just to add you, like you said, Pakistan, of course, the floods, the famous sentence was, I think we had the UN Secretary General over here, that what happened in Pakistan will not stay in Pakistan. And you see that, of course, the global south is affected with the heat waves, the British Columbia, even Canada, that's because of heat waves over there. So this 1 degrees increase of temperature is affecting all walks, all people from all societies and all nations. Of course, it is different impacts on different, like we have common but differentiated responsibilities in the context of UN, but it is definitely affecting all.
Indeed, it is the case here. Sir, you also like wrote a very famous article where you talked about the ecological anxiety. So your work on youth and ecological anxiety, and in the broader YCPS architecture, which is youth, climate, peace, and security architecture, young people are described as agents of resilience, not just victims of climate stress. But in practice, how often like is that true? When does youth as agent become a comfortable narrative that lets institutions off the hook?
I think that's again a very important. You see, you already said that bulk of the population is the youth. And in our national poet, Allama Iqbal, he says a famous verse in Urdu, Chirag seher hun bujha chahta hun, which in English means that a candle of the twilight, it's just about to die. So, but youth are the one who are going to carry forward it and going to live with it. So they are the one who are the most affected, peoples in their 20s and 30s, because they have to link for their next few decades and for the children also. Whereas the people in their 50s and 60s, they have past bulk of the time. And I would like to quote a book from here. I think Elizabeth Colbert is the author, The Sixth Extinction, which is we are heading towards if we go on with this global warming at this scale. And in this, the youth are very important. Interestingly, as I was taking a class, I heard a word from one of my students, which I had not heard, and I was educated, and it was renting. And it was because of this, there was temperature was about 40 degrees, there was lack of electricity and something like that. So I felt that youth are really affected, and they are affected in three ways. First of all, of course, the warming, they are affected. Then they feel that they are contributing to it. And then much is that they can't do much about it because they feel that they can't do, there's a general feeling out, and it is affecting their mental health, which is very important. And it becomes much more dangerous once they even don't know that they are suffering from this disease, because which is the ecological anxiety, and especially in the global south. And that's where we need a lot of greater Thunbergs from all over, from Asia, from Pakistan, from each other countries.
Indeed, sir, and I really want to add a follow up on to that. Like, even if you say so that youth are the direct effectees, so what would be like your one suggestion to the youth that what role they can play at their individual capacities to tackle the issue of climate change, which is deeply disturbing their individual lives in many areas, specifically climate prone areas, where they're living, and what role they can play in their communities and for the larger benefit of this country. when it comes to climate change?
I think what I would say is that move on from participation much more. The we need to have local solutions, the engagement of the youth, because once there's young blood, it is enthusiastic. It has to be innovative. It has to be out of the box. They instead of relying, they need to take the baton in their own hands. And then they
Hmm.
really can make the difference. I would say that instead of just participating, have the ownership of the resilience. This is what the major difference they can make by this.
Absolutely. So next question would be more militarily in nature, like you described the military as operating on four levels in relation to climate. Number one is as emitter, as affected, as a responder, and the last one is as a peacekeeper. That's, I would say, a generally different way of reading the institution's relationship to the climate crisis. Which of those four roles do you think is most strategically neglected, and why does it matter for peace?
I would like to say that instead of one, if I were to have two, the choice of two, I would say
Sure,
first of
sure.
all, emitters. Yeah. First of all, emitters. Yeah, military is globally, it is about 5.5% contribution of the global emissions. If militaries were a state, they would be the fourth largest emitter as a country. So first, this realization is there in few of the advanced countries, like for NATO, they have their Center of Excellence for Climate Change. But majority of the militaries, it is neglected. In the Kyoto Protocol, it was omitted. In Paris Agreement, it was optional. But I think time would come and the few years that it would be compulsory. And you can't manage what you are not measuring. Perhaps measuring and managing and controlling it is one of the key factors. And second would be the peacekeeping. The peacekeepers are deployed in the fragile, in the conflict zones. So over there, the peacekeepers can play a lot of role. Well, they are on the ground. They are affected. They are directly dealing with the women, the children who are affected in the conflict zones. So over there, taking them, if the peacekeepers have the climate literacy and they can contribute and they can tell the indigenous people that they are basically they can contribute towards the protection of the environment instead of destroying that. And we have for all the peacekeeping missions, we have now the climate guidance is there, but there's a much gap between its knowledge and application, which needs to be addressed.
Okay, so I think what I can conclude from your point is that when peacekeepers, specifically the military peacekeepers, they are sent on peacekeeping missions into many other countries. So what lacks here is the climate toolkit that needs to be there, or they should have that, toolkit while they are moving abroad. So is there like something work being done on this thing, or is it still in under process at UN or many other agencies? So specifically UN, if we talk about.
I think there's a lot of work being done. There is work being done on paper, greening the blue helmets. Of course, the
Yeah.
peacekeepers are known as the blue helmets. A lot of we have climate security within the UN headquarters. There's a separate cell which is working on that. In the UNDP, there is what need is the action on the training. Also, the UN peacekeepers, the 2 weeks training which they receive. There's a one lecture on it. But one is the knowledge, second is the attitude, and third is the practice. And it is the
Mhm.
third one which is the most important, the contribution on ground, that all those theories, all those findings need to be translated into actions on ground. And it is more important because this ground is the ground which is the worst affected because of the conflicts.
Yeah, absolutely makes sense. Hope so that further things can be developed, specifically with regards to military in the future as well. So let's go towards geographical dimension of conflict and have some countries and continents. So if you see the Sahel, the Horn of Africa, South Asia, so basically these regions don't share borders, but they share a set of converging pressures, which could be the glacial melt, water stress, youth bulges, and weak regional cooperation. Like, is there a structural logic to that convergence, or is it coincidence? And what does it mean for how we build solutions for climate?
I think you have yourself in your brief said. I would say that this convergence is not coincidence. It reflects a structural pattern, and the structural pattern is because of first of all the ecological stress. Like for the regions in the Himalayas and South Asia, it is the glacial melting, the monsoons. Whereas in the Sahel and Horn of Africa, it is the desertification region, and both are contributing to what the water stress. In this region, the water is being weaponized. Over there, the water, because of lack of water, it is all the arable land is being reduced. Second, you said about, of course, the demographic surge, youth. It's commonly said that for these regions, these country, it is the people. It is difficult to make They are not worried about the end of the world. They are worried about the end of the month because of their financial conditions. It's difficult to make both ends meet. And then, of course, governance issue and lack of regional cooperation. Climate change is a global and not a regional phenomena, but the solutions can be found on regional basis. So
Hmm.
there's a lot of room for regional cooperation. So basically, it's a mixture of all these which creates a perfect storm. And a lot can be done both by the state, by the society, both through the bottom-up approach and the top-down approach to address these issues. But every citizen has to come forward and be a part of the solution instead of problem.
Perfect. Also, sir, I really want to bring here the platform of COP. I think this year it is happening in Turkey. So, do you think so? Like you talked about the regional cooperation on climate change and how different nations can come together and share their knowledge and then try to build solutions, out of that. So, I can't see like even I can't think of any global gathering rather than COP, which happens every year. So, like, what do you suggest? As like if we do that in South Asia, so what's your take on that? Does these countries come together like we have came together in the form of a SAR? So are you seeing any regional cooperation for climate specific issues coming up in the future?
I think there needs to be. Like I said, that solutions can be found on regional basis. Like in case of South Asia, what are the problems? The problems are first of all the water, the riparian, then air pollution. It affects both all the nations, Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, and all the nations of the South Asia.
Hmm.
So once their problems are together, the melting of the glaciers, the water corporations, they need to find a solution. See, like Kashmir is the biggest dispute on the table of the UN. It has been diplomatically tried, militarily tried, economically tried, naturally tried. Perhaps trying to solve it from an ecological angle might bring out new solutions, because this was something which was not thought about, say, 2, 3 decades ago. But now people on both sides of the line of control are affected. We have very interesting projects. You see, the climate finance model of Bangladesh is very good. We have very
Hmm.
interesting living Indus project. Once we have a living Indus, why can't we have a living Ganges and living Brahmaputra, India and Bangladesh, or a living Everest and living K2? There's a lot needs to be done. Perhaps we need to. The first question I would refer, moving out of the geopolitics and looking the things from the geo-environment would provide solutions.
Indeed, it definitely, and I think it's such a optimistic view of bringing countries together to find out common solutions, not for their own, respective country, but for the entire region to save it from, multiple climate disasters. So let's talk about the climate literacy. You have called for climate literacy in military specifically and security education, and then demilitarization of climate hotspots like Siachen, and science diplomacy across borders. So these are structurally ambitious asks. For a young person listening right now, not a policymaker, not a journal, what is the one space where youth can genuinely shift the dynamic, not symbolically, but actually?
I have partially answered it. Like we have communities now not being displaced by war, but by wildfires and water levels. So, what needs to be done? We need to have indigenous people involved, local solutions instead of exported solutions, the
Hmm.
engagement of youth at all tiers, and I would repeat, different, innovative, out of the box, and climate literacy. Let me tell you an example. Like in our country, Pakistan, there used to be 20 marks which were used to be given for the A levels inter students for 2 weeks of training, which was traditional aspects of training. Perhaps now, if you have this, like, okay, every graduate student would plant 40 trees, and those have to survive. So having such like ideas, and even best if they are at state level, even not they are at state level, at societal level, at very regional, at very group level, such initiatives are taken, because there might be a different requirement in one territory. There might be, because of flooding, we need to take measures. In one territory, because of the air pollution, we need to take measures. In another territory, because of the less of rain, water storage might be in coastal communities, mangrove swamps, to see the So it has to be very specific, but the involvement of locals where they take not only the ownership but lead these resilience measures. That's what is required.
Yes, indeed. I think if people are the direct affectees, they also should be the direct responders as well.
Yes.
And the other day, I mean, I just wanted to add this point since it's very much relevant. The other day, there was a Japanese colleague of us, and he was telling me that in Japan, children are from the very basic level, they
Yeah.
are directly involved into, these kind of
Community.
programs where they can actually see and understand the value. So he was showing me, I think, a model where children have to put or grow some plants for their, as you were mentioning in the university education, to do that in their school education so that they can credit it for their courses. And I think it's
Yes.
such kind of innovative solutions can actually also incentivize youth at the same time, and then also help them build the understanding to have those kind of solutions for their communities.
Yes, just to add,
Sure, sir.
there are many advancements. Carbon capture technologies are over there. We have, of course, we said that excessive use of coal, oil, and gas, the curses, excessive use of that, less reliance on sun. And wind and solar, and this plantation, you see, like we have Amazon forests. They are known as the lungs of the world because 20% of the carbon sink sources are there in the Amazon forest. So if and trees are the silent standing superheroes. Very basic solution. If in one community you have a lot of trees, you can just see the temperature difference in other community. Just might be 1 kilometer apart where there are less of trees. So this is something which needs to be inculcated. The biodiversity and very small thing, but having a long effect.
Absolutely. And I think, sir, just to add to that, there was a man, he made a video and he has that device. And when he, a temperature measuring device basically, and when he get that device under the shadow of a tree, that so the temperature actually gets lower. Like it was around 10, 11 degrees Celsius under the shadow. And when we takes that to, apart from the tree, it goes like to 18, 19 degrees Celsius. So I think that's how we can also like educate people about, the importance of by showing them and these kind of experiments. So yeah, wonderful. So you also like just recently you closed one of your recent talks with this line, and I want to emphasize on this that if we fail, the environment will not just be a victim of war, it will become the cause of the next one. That's a warning, but it also implies a window. How wide is that window, and what would closing it require?
That's a very interesting and thought-provoking question you have asked. Before, I would like to refer a book, with a very interesting book by Michael Mann, The Hockey Stick and the Climate Wars. Hockey stick, the temperature has remained like this, and now it is rising like the edge of the hockey stick. If you see the situation, the resources, of course, we have limited resources. Rare minerals have come, and the buzzword is sustainability. Implies sustainability is not that we have inherited these resources from our grandparents. In fact, we have borrowed it from our children and grandchildren. So, what if we fail the next victim of war? I would say what we need is regional cooperation, diplomacy, enhance climate literacy, especially amongst the policymakers and the military leaders. And one word I often say is we need to have climate securitization. Climate securitization is something, if you securitize something, it becomes talk of the people, it becomes priority. Is it amongst the top three priorities of your priorities? Often people confuse it and relate it with militarization. That's different. Climate securitization, I would like to give example like in 45, Lebensraum was the term used by Germany that he needs most living space. So if we securitize it and then actions were taken, militarized for a wrong reason. Or we had, I think, Mr. Blair and Bush, weapons of mass destruction. It was so much securitized and then action was taken, whereas it was not there. Contrary, over here, climate is so much affecting our both traditional, state-centric, and non-traditional people's security, but it is not being securitized. It is not amongst the leading priorities of the nations. So if you securitize climate, then it will become amongst your leading priorities, and then actions would be taken by all. So what we need to do is that we need to go for climate securitization.
Definitely. I think that is something which also needs to be prioritized. As you mentioned that climate is the biggest elephant in the room, but it often gets a seat at the negotiation table. So, and building on to
But
that,
also pays the bill. Also pays the
yeah,
bill.
also it also pays the bill as well. So, sir,
Yeah.
taking the opportunity from this sentence to ask you a question that why is it so that it is left out from the negotiation table? And what is that one message that you wanna give or leave to those policymakers or to those climate practitioners who are actually producing work, but why we can't see that change happening on a global level? I mean, if we get even the seat at the negotiation table, but real climatic action, why is it still missing? So yeah, any one suggestion, any one message you want to give them?
I won't go into so much of politics, like what were the policies of Mr. Biden and what are the policies of Mr. Trump, or for that matter, other regional. But I think what is needed is people like you, the youth, to come forward and take the baton in your hands. There's a very interesting podcast series initiated that not a climate scientist, and in that the podcast host, she takes every common people so that it becomes talk of the town, how it is affecting all the people. So the policy makers, they have their own agendas, political agendas, economical reform, and so much, and they are fed by that information, which is through various sources. But I think it is up to you people, the youth people who are in their 20s and 30s, who need to think, who are so much affected because, the elite, the major policymakers, they control environment, not that much affected unless there is a wildfire, there's a flood, there's a tsunami, then they come, and that is also for a limited time. But I think if you people, the youth, do it, what you are doing, and do it because that a lot of intensity and frequency with which the things are coming in, and that would make the difference. That's what's needed.
Very perfect. I think we almost have came to the end of our conversation. But before I conclude that, I was listening to your podcast the other day as well. And in that podcast, you give a very classical example when it comes to like climate smart solutions are saving strategies. I think you talked about rather than, giving the tap on when you try to do a shave, I mean, you waste a lot of water. So what was the idea behind that? And what other, I mean, common methods that people can adopt to save water or to save the environment overall when we contextualize Pakistan?
Yes, so you see, in Pakistan, we have our open source national security policy says that we are the world's third water scarce country. And still, we annually waste about 39 million acre feet of water. Such a huge water, 39 million acre feet of water, it goes during this July, August, September in the Arabian Sea. Small dams, all these things are needed at the society, state level. But at state level, you see, like, unfortunately, use electricity, the bill is corresponding to the usage. But in Pakistan, we have fixed standard system that either you use even 100 buckets or you use 1,000 buckets. There's standard rate of water, which needs to be changed because that's not ethical. You should be built according, because if the people had this realization, then like they would not have tap water being wasted or water being, they would use the mugs. So these things, I think I can go on long for this, how
That's a
especially
longer
in our context we can save water both at our state level also and at society level also.
Thank you so much, sir. I think with this note, we almost reached to the end of our podcast. Sir, thank you so much once again for taking out the time and making visible something that far too many institutions are still treating as invisible. I'm sure that this conversation will definitely add value to the climate discourse and to all our listeners and viewers, and they can take many key takeaways from this conversation. So this conversation is a part of a continuing series. Links to Dr. Shafi's publications and the CCP Toolkit initiative are also be attaching in the episode notes. So if this episode moved you, share it, because these ideas need the kind of reach that only people to people networks can create. Thank you so much, sir. It was a pleasure talking to you and having you at the podcast in the future as well for another topic on climate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It was a pleasure.